PHL 17 presents In Focus, a look at the issues affecting the Philadelphia region. Now your host, Steve Highsmith.
Bullying, domestic violence, and child sexual abuse. The acts are assaults on humanity. Good morning, I'm Steve Highsmith and welcome to In Focus. Government and academic researchers indicate that 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 20 boys has been the victim of a child sexual assault. That 24 people a minute in the U.S. are victims of domestic violence. Between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 children say they have been bullied at school. My guest is trying to reduce that violence. With me now is Rhett Hackett, founder of the nonprofit Humanity Preservation Foundation. Mr. Hackett is also a survivor of child sexual abuse. It's good to see you, Rhett. How are you?
Very good, thanks, Steve.
Good. What do you mean by humanity preservation?
Well, honestly, where it comes from is that my belief is that at the core of humanity is children. That is really, if you're expecting that you're going to create the next change, it's going to start with children. So if we're not protecting them or preserving them, then we are technically not preserving humanity going forward.
And so you started this foundation with that title. What do you hope to do in the foundation?
Well, what we want to do is there's 2 areas that we really focus on. One is the healing component of individuals that have been victimized, but more importantly is the educational aspect to prevent these types of acts from happening.
And when you talk about education, what's involved with that? Is that a matter of just getting a bunch of teachers to talk to kids? Is it that kind of education, or is it something different?
Actually, it's a little bit broader than that. It really is about speaking to all the groups that are involved that are connected to children. So that is educators, caregivers, and parents, along with the students directly to themselves as well. And by getting everybody on the same page and speaking of the same topics, then that's how you're going to have these individuals be protected and prevent this from happening to them.
Well, it seems to me you're focusing in subsets on 3 areas primarily, and one of those is child sexual abuse, and the numbers are staggering. The 1 in 5 girls, the 1 in 20 boys, for example. How do you view the landscape? Is this something that is a problem that has always been about this level in our nation? Around the world, or is it getting worse, better? How do you describe it?
Well, here's the thing. So we know, actually the numbers that I know are 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 6 boys before the age of 18. And in 90% of those cases, the victim knew who their perpetrator was. So those numbers by themselves are alarming, but when you really factor in that those are on reported statistics, the numbers are actually even scarier. Because we all know that, when it comes to child sexual abuse, in most cases people remain very silent on the topic because they're burdened by the shame that goes along with that type of abuse. So having said that, that is exactly the reason why I'm stepping forward and doing what we're doing.
Well, you're stepping forward in part because this is a process that you have been through for the last few years, where you have become very public about your own story. And in fact, it was on Oprah Winfrey that you told the nation about your own story.
Correct.
As you look back on that experience of being on that program and saying what you said, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Self-empowerment, and a realization that you can in fact tell your story and you're going to be okay. The journey has been unbelievable, and that is, the more that I continued to speak, the more I had people speaking back to me in regards to their own personal stories. And in doing so, that is, I just kept saying that something needs to be done. This isn't something where we need to find a cure. The cure is right in front of us, and it is all about education.
And do you still get feedback as a result of that show?
Oh, it never stops. So the show,
it was about 4 years ago or so?
It was 2010. Every now and then it does air, and periodically I'll receive an email, or I'll get somebody will follow me on Twitter and they'll send me a message, and usually it's them telling their story or telling me of a story that because of that show it inspired them to, and then fill in the blank, whether they told the story or whether their son came forward to them or something to that effect.
But that's an amazing thing, not only self-empowering in your own sense of how you conduct your own life and how you feel about yourself and how you can come to some understanding of what happened to you and put it in a place where you realize you've done nothing wrong and that you are still a 100% great human being.
Absolutely.
But also to know that you are now positively affecting all these other people.
Yeah, that is really, it is what motivates me. And some of the people that I have worked with that, they've done the work. I've only just been there as a sounding board, or what I prefer to call a service advisor. So to get them into the direction of counseling, law enforcement, we don't ever take the place of that, because that's why those people are there. But I know that from the point in which I was in the thick of my own particular story, it's a really confusing and alarming time period for somebody, where if you're looking for services, I don't know that you really have a clear head in terms of what you specifically need.
Can you share a little bit of your story? Because I think it's important for others who might be in a situation where they haven't told anybody about a situation
Sure.
they're in, that they get some sense that they're not alone, that these things do happen, and that it's okay to talk about it.
Definitely. So I always tell people that I grew up pretty much on the set of Leave It to Beaver, so with a mom and a dad and my brother, and it still happened to me. I grew up down at the New Jersey shore, and my perpetrator was a neighbor that lived right down the street. And it started at the age of 12 and went all the way until the age of 17 before I put a stop to it by just saying, I can't do this anymore, and that was pretty much the end of that. But I didn't tell anybody. Until the first person I ever told was my girlfriend, who became my wife at the age of 20. And then from that point forward, I never even touched upon the subject professionally, spoke of it, and really was tied down by the burden of the shame that is associated with that type of abuse. The fortunate part, if there is, I always say I'm lucky, and if you can call that, if you can use that word when you're speaking of this, that my motivation was, my mask was to do everything with success. And, if I did well, then nobody would ever be able to connect the faults that I thought were associated with the abuse that I had taken as a child. But come to find out, that doesn't last for a long period of time. Whereas some people choose alcohol or drugs, and I chose that method. And that's why I say I'm lucky, because it didn't take me, down a really
Take you
awful
down,
path.
yeah, another path.
Correct.
That would not be good.
But by 2005, I pretty much had run out of gas, and that's when I started to see somebody that was professionally. By 2010, I went on a retreat where there was other men for the first time speaking the thoughts that had been spinning in my head for 20 some odd years. And coming off of that is when I knew that I wanted to speak out. And the universe laid before us the Oprah Winfrey Show she was doing her special on 200 men that had been sexually abused. And all along the build process of that was that people needed to hear that, oh my gosh, it happens, that happened to me. And they also needed to see that in speaking out, I was still okay, and that you're gonna be okay too. And so that's one of the things whenever I'm reaching out to a victim, is to say, I know you don't see it right now, but pretty soon you're going to.
And do you find that you had periods where you repressed the memory of what happened? Did you try to just get it out of your mind? Even question whether or not it happened?
I never questioned that. I never forgot that it didn't happen. What I repressed was the feeling that was associated with it. So as long as I kept moving, it wasn't going to get me. But it was always there. And in realizing that it was always there is what really kind of led to not being able to repress that any longer. That feeling of the guilt and the shame that really you shouldn't have.
Those around you, and you said only maybe one other person really knew about this besides the person who committed the crime, but the person that loved you and you loved, who knew about this, were they able to react to you dealing with this in a new way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the frustrating part is that the people that are closest to you that know, they know that there is no shame associated with it and that you shouldn't feel bad. So my wife in this case was just waiting for me to get there as well too. And now, in doing what I'm doing,
She sounds like a very patient person.
Oh, very patient, because it is, it really is a process. And you bring up a really good point, because there is a ripple effect. There's a ripple effect to the people that you are closest with. I can't begin to tell you what it took for me in telling my parents what had happened and getting them to the point of understanding that
It's not their fault either.
It's not their fault. That's correct.
I would think the first thing as a parent that I would feel is guilty, even though, because I would say, the first thing I would say to myself is, well, did I do everything I could have done to prevent that from happening?
Absolutely, and that is exactly what I was faced with. But you know, what we now know is that the message that we were being taught back in the time period where I was growing was stranger danger.
Yeah.
But nobody really taught the message that if 90% of the cases the victim knows who the perpetrator is, that message was not being taught. What do you do when it is somebody that you know?
What's that like, you think, for either yourself, I mean, take either side of this, as people started to know what had happened to you and that you were handling it, dealing with it, whatever the right phrase is, but maybe you weren't dealing with it at the pace that they wanted, or for them it was, that's history, it's past, we think nothing bad at all, but it seems like inside you were still not accepting that.
Correct.
And so why is that, you think, that all these people that you love that are so close to you are telling you it's not nothing, but in real life, in real terms going forward, forget it, it's over, and you're not able to do that, right?
No, and here's the reason why, is that when that type of event is happening to you and you are a child, you really don't have the brain function to process that. And you live with it much longer as a secret inside, continuing to abuse yourself, if you want to call it, because you beat yourself up over it, than you do after you've gone public. So really, I've only gone public for the last 4 years, but for 28 years, I continued to have it inside of me, and that it was, you know, I always thought that it was my own fault.
Well, we'll talk more about this
Okay.
and about the Humanity Preservation Foundation when we continue. More with Rhett Hackett and the Preservation Foundation and his take on bullying ahead on InFocus on PHL 17. And guided by that, the foundation then begins to heal victims and prevent others from becoming victims. Back on InFocus, I'm Steve Highsmith, and we're continuing with me on this edition of InFocus is Rhett Hackett, the founder of the Humanity Preservation Foundation. Healing and education are the twin pillars of your organization.
Absolutely, yes.
And the healing part, is it something that there are common principles, whether you're a victim of domestic violence or bullying or child sexual abuse, or do you tailor it to each one of those?
Well, of course, you know, every case is different, but I think it does have to be tailored to the specifics of what is going on. But the general component is that somebody needs to be provided the opportunity to speak whatever their situation is and to get the resources in order to correct or prevent it from continuing to happen.
And you hope to have a resource center soon. What would this center be?
So the idea is to have a physical location that would provide the resources of information for different components specific to a state or a location wherever it is positioned, so that somebody could come in and they don't have to do the research work. And I can tell you from my own personal story that when I was looking for resources and trying to figure out how I was going to fix this, it was a nightmare for me.
What do you mean by resources? Are we talking about just information from psychologists and psychiatrists, or what are we talking about?
It could be that. It could be just general counseling. It could be whatever information we can gather and provide for an individual to speak to their children on the topic, or how to approach trying to seek out legal counsel. Because I can tell you that for me, I started that process with me, and I had to speak with 10 attorneys. And you don't speak directly to the attorney, you had to speak to their secretary. Well, that's 10 times that I am telling this story over and over again, only to find out that I don't have any legal recourse.
No, it's almost like being re-traumatized.
Absolutely. And so what we know is if we reduce that to have somebody re-traumatized, then they have a better chance of getting over this and healing a little bit quicker.
So would this resource center be an intermediary? Would you I mean, how does that, would you advise them as to when to go to law enforcement, or do you not go down that road?
Actually, you use the best word. We use it all the time. That's exactly what HPF
Which
wants
one?
is to be an intermediary.
Oh, intermediary.
Because we'll never take the place of law enforcement and counseling, but we like to call it a support direction, if you want to call it, to give somebody that point of reference to say, okay, this is where...
A safe, non-judgmental, clear,
Absolutely.
simple contact point from people who care and who've been there and know what it's like.
Absolutely.
When we look at bullying, how would you, why have you put that under this umbrella?
It's a great question. So for both bullying and domestic violence, so what we know is that when you have a child that is being bullied or living in a home with domestic violence, they are at a greater risk of being victimized by a perpetrator under the terms of child sexual abuse. And it's not to say that those are the only children that it happens to, because I am classic case here that such is not the case for me. But we know that there's a greater chance of it happening because that child is looking for some sort of sense of security. So if they're having a problem in the school system where they don't have any friends or they're being outcasted by the group, then that opens up the door for a perpetrator to come in and say, okay, well, I will now be your friend. Let me bring you on board through the whole grooming process, which is providing some sort of, whether it's a physical or an emotional component to that child in an effort to coerce them into then participating in some sort of sexual act.
We've had a lot of attention on bullying the last few years in our society. Do you think we're making headway?
You know what? I hear all the time people coming to me and saying that there isn't enough that's being done. So I don't know that, how do you measure that progress? Because I know that schools have, programs in place and systems, but I continue to hear that this is what is going on. And I don't think that people understand the depth and the long range of how that puts a child at risk. And, so if we start to educate on that, then, we have the opportunity to not only reduce the bullying component, but we also have the opportunity to reduce the risk of that child being victimized.
The domestic violence component, again, you kind of put that together with the bullying in the first response to my question, but why do you have that component in there?
Because A, the disruption in the household, and we also know that when there is domestic violence in a household where there's children, there's a 40 to 60% chance that the child is also being abused. So again, when you have a child that's being abused, what are they going to look for? They're going to look for a place of a sense of self, security, and some sort of safety.
In your experience, are you able to sort of do a one-size-fits-all in terms of the 101 on this? Or do you find that there are different barriers in neighborhoods or culturally or religiously or anything else that you're having to navigate through or reach people in different ways?
Well, the greatest obstacle that we face, and it goes across pretty much all different social groups, is the stigma of, well, we don't talk about things like that. That really is...
Even in this day and age, because we talk about everything in this day.
Oh, no, even in this day and age. Because I actually, and I kind of it grits my teeth when I hear people say, well, we don't want to offend anybody. And really...
Yeah, but they say that to you, we're talking about a child being abused, and they say we don't talk about it because we don't want to offend anybody?
Yes. And I actually, this is a really quick story. A friend of mine heard, after I had gone public on the Oprah Winfrey Show, she was at a soccer field in the township that it happened, that I grew up in, and she was hearing parents talking about child sexual abuse, and that there was this guy that went on Oprah and he was from here, and one of the other parents actually said the words that anybody that's in this industry doesn't like to hear, and they were just like, well, that doesn't happen here, does it? And that's when she heard the story, and she was like, well, yeah, it did, and that's why he has gone public with his story. So, so we are still facing that, and that's a really huge challenge.
And this Humanity Preservation Foundation will be one of the voices that will be combating that.
If I have anything to do with it, absolutely. Just because I know, I know what difference it makes. And when you look at these statistics, even the sex trafficking is alarming. That's like a $9.5 billion industry.
Well, we're going to have more with Rhett Hackett and the path to prevent violence in a moment on PHL 17. In Focus continues on PHL 17 with Brett Hackett, founder of the nonprofit Humanity Preservation Foundation, a great young foundation, and its purpose is?
Pretty much to prevent individuals from being victimized, or if they have been victimized, give them the direction and support of healing.
And by victims, we mean victims of child sexual abuse, victims of domestic violence, and victims of bullying.
Absolutely, yes.
And the method of healing, your message is there is a method and that people can heal. Mm-hmm. You're living proof of that.
Definitely.
But it's an ongoing process. I mean, it varies, I guess, with each individual. Some people may heal more quickly, but healing is possible.
It's great that you say that.
If not probable.
No, definitely. When people have asked me what has been the secret of my success, it really is just knowing that it never just goes away. And that really the key component is the ability to speak the story, to tell people what is going on so that you can get it to stop, and so that you can then begin to heal and go through the process of healing.
Can you make the analogy to like a bad cut on a finger that you need stitches for, that it will heal, but there'll still be a scar?
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy, because let's take it in the reverse, that if you have a really bad cut and you do nothing about it, it's only going to get worse. So it's not going to heal, it's going to get infected, and it could cause bigger problems down the road. Mm-hmm. So then if you do address the wound and you take the necessary steps, then you're going to heal, and it's not going to fester.
It may not be a scar, but if there is a scar, that's okay too.
Oh, absolutely.
The scar is not going to prevent you from using your finger, using
Correct.
the rest of your
Not at all.
mind and soul.
Not at all. And really, any shame that is associated with the abuse lies on the individual that caused the abuse, or whoever is going to judge somebody mm-hmm. for that abuse.
How can people help you in your foundation as you grow?
Well, of course, obviously as a not-for-profit, we look for a donation.
You're a 501c3.
We are a 501c3, and anybody can make a donation by going to our website at humanitypreservationfoundation.org and click on the Donate tab. And then we also have people that volunteer to do, whatever initiatives that we're working on, whether they want to do a mailing across their own family, mm-hmm. or once we get to the point where we're outreaching to bigger venues, or on the street doing kind of street awareness, where you're handing out items that are creating awareness, depending upon what the topic is.
That is an interesting thing. I think you want to be very foreground in this. I mean, you want to be private for the individuals that are involved, but you want to educate and not be in academic forums.
No.
You want to be out there telling everybody.
Absolutely, because because it does speak to my own particular story to say, okay, it's okay to publicly speak about these, but if we just contain it into one particular area, then it's not going to be as broad as what I think and need and know it needs to be. So if I can get more people on board, and I've done that, it is amazing to me when you do Q&A and you have people asking questions. It's almost like a breath of fresh air that they're finally having the opportunity to ask the questions that they've always wanted to ask, but they just haven't been given the opportunity to.
Have you a handle on whether what all of this is preventing violence, and these are subcategories, or are we trying to change people's expressions of their own failings and frailties? I mean, how do you describe it? This is a big task when you get down to the core of it.
It definitely is. Really, the way that I look at it is investing in the self-worth of an individual. Because when you have worthlessness and somebody doesn't see the value of their own selves, that's when you have a problem. So if we can change that mindset, especially in children, that they have a self-worth that is greater than what they could ever imagine, then you're going to have a less chance that they're going to want to hurt themselves, or as soon as they are hurt, that they go and they speak to somebody.
All right, thank you very much, sir.
Thanks, Steve.
Brett
Really
Hackett.
appreciate it.
Good to see you. And that's In Focus for this week. Thank you for watching. I'm Steve Highsmith. Enjoy your weekend and have a great week ahead.